Good evening and welcome back to yet another episode of Third and Short Overtime. I actually counted. This is the 10th episode, so we're into double figures tonight, and this isn't the draft preview either, so we're doing well. We've got an intro now and everything, so things are looking up. Right, so last week we did, well, first of all, let me introduce, fucking hell, I fucked up already. Let me introduce my co-host for this evening. To my left, I have Jordan. On the bottom left, we have the Geordie Preacher, Mark, and bottom right, we have producer and everything else extraordinaire, Bones. Hiya, guys. How you doing? Good to see you all. So, last week we did offensive breakout players, and pretty good episode, I thought. TJ Hawkinson won the vote for the most likely to reach Pro Bowl this year. So that's a win for Mark. And for Bones, I guess, since it's his theme. But tonight we're going to be looking at the other side of the ball. We're going to be talking defensive breakout players, and there's some interesting guys to talk about tonight. Actually, intriguingly looking at it, a lot of them are very sort of like second and third year players. I think every single one is either second or third year. So these are guys that haven't been in the league too long, but we're looking to see take a massive step this year. We'll start. We're not really going in order when we do these, so I'll start with the man to my left. I'm going to put you up first, Jordan. You've gone for Rachelle Gary at the Green Bay Packers. So tell us what you're thinking about him. I think he's still muted.
Unmute myself. It was a lot of swearing anyway. Thank you for putting me under pressure and all that. But yeah, it's Rachelle Gary, third-year player for Green Bay Packers. If a lot of people watch Amazon All or Nothing, you'll remember him from the Michigan Wolverines did an episode, I think it was the 2017 season, that they covered on All or Nothing, and he were one of the main guys, one of the main guys that they featured on that program. And he defensive end playing for Michigan, and you could see the talent that he had. He was unbelievable, like powerhouse, getting into the backfield. It was like men against boys at times with him. You could see his physical attributes were off the charts, in college. And he got drafted in 2019. I think it was number 12. It might have been 11 or 12 pick for the Packers in 2019. And I'm probably guilty as well as a few people. I thought he was going to come into the league the way I saw him in college and absolutely steamroll it. But it probably, thinking about it now, looking back, it was coming in as from a defensive end. He was going to switch into a 3-4 at the Packers. He was going to switch to an outside linebacker at the Packers. So thinking about it now, it was probably going to take him a few years to get to grips with the NFL, really. You could see his physical features were unbelievable, but it was just that difference in coming to the NFL, like in how you set out your different schemes and stuff like that. And the first year was a decent year with not too many snaps. I think he only picked up about 20% of the snaps of the season. But you can see over last year, his second year, he's picking up more snaps. He's getting to grips with the NFL now. He's getting to grips on what it's about. The physicality of defensive linemen. Now, and it just seems like it's clicking. And I think next year is going to be a massive year for him. I think, especially at the back end of last year, you saw a lot of his sacks came at the back end of 2020, and it's always going to be hard as well. When you've got both Smiths playing there, you've got Preston Smith and I know Zadarius Smith. Like you're not always going to get into the game with them as well. You're going to have limited snaps, but it just seems like it's clicking now. And this is. He came at the same time as offensive linebacker coach. I think I always get his first name wrong. It's Summit Smith again, which is a lot of Smiths. I think it's Michael Smith. I think he played for the Ravens and things like that. And he knows a linebacker himself. He's really just these two have come together, and he's working closely with him, and he's just really clicking now. And it's kind of like a son, like a father-son feature. He's got his arm around him. He's taking his time with him, and I think we're going to reap the benefit of sometimes people come into the league, and it's just instant, especially when someone's picked so high, you expect so much of them. And I think we've talked about it on previous episodes where in the draft you get 2 or 3 players that are you get guaranteed starters. But some players, it takes a few years just to get pushed it all together. You know, they might have the physical attributes, you know, but it's understanding the game in the NFL. It's different to college, and I think Michael Smith really took his time with him, and it's really, you can see the benefits reaping. And I'm expecting a really big year for him this year on this defense for the Packers, especially now, like, everything's coming together on the offense. You know, we don't have to worry about that anymore. But on this defense, you know, there is a new defensive coach there. I think I forget his name, but I know they've got a new defensive coach there this year, and it was a surprise getting him. His name might come to me in a bit. I don't know if any of you guys can remember. I can't remember it off my head now. They've got a new defensive coordinator. Sorry. So I can't see it being too much of an effect. They'll probably stick to the same things that they're doing there because it's been working so well for him. And I just expecting big things for him now. You know, like one of them players that just. It just some players just, it doesn't click straight away, and he needed time to get it all together, you know. And I just think it's just hitting right now. I think his snaps went up to 44%, and the Packers know it's coming. And I think I don't know if Bones will hate me for saying this. There's a couple of sacks on Stafford that he does last year. And he's just getting into the backfield. He's just an absolute freak of nature, you know, and it's just, if he can get, it's going to be hard to get more snaps, but I think he's pushing Preston Smith out a bit, you know, now, and I think this year you'll see a lot more of him. And cheers, Max. Joe Barry, going back, Joe Barry's the new defensive coordinator. I didn't say that, and I just think that I think it's just a big year for him, and I just watch this guy go to work this year. He's going to be phenomenal to watch. He is one of the best physical, defenders I've seen. You know, I think he's 6'5", 270 pounds. Just, yeah. I must admit, I fell in love with him from Michigan, and I probably expected more, like I said, coming out. But I just think it's just clicking now, and I think I can't wait to see what he brings to the table this year. And I think it's going to be his break. Well, it's obviously why I picked him. I think it's going to be his breakout year this year for sure.
Good stuff. I like that summary. I think he's a player that I kind of followed going into that draft. I thought we might have been looking at him. Obviously, we ended up with Bosa, so I mean it kind of worked. But at the time we were looking at pass rushers, he seemed like a really good one in that draft. I do think he was quite raw coming out of college, which I think is possibly what's contributed to his little bit slow start, maybe. But coming into year 3, it feels very much like a prove it year. I think it is for a lot of rookies, especially like high first round guys. I think he'll do really well this year. Joe Barry, I don't know much about Joe Barry as a coach, but it'll be interesting to see what he brings to the Packers. The defense has kind of let them down a few times, so if we can get a little bit more, extra 5% out of him, it might make all the difference. You mentioned him having an impact in the Lions game last year, so let's go to our resident Lions fan, Bones. You'll obviously remember that, no doubt, although I don't know if it stands out in amongst all the other games last year. But have you seen much of, I guess you see him twice a year, have you seen much of Rachelle Gary? What do you reckon to him as a player?
Jordan made some good points. I think there's one that I do want to touch on, and it is a different beast where he's playing like now. Realistically, when you think about it, you've come from a college level. You were playing defensive end. You not only have you moved position, you've moved into the professional league. Like, you moved to the outside linebacker, and obviously, as we talked about when we covered the North divisions, like there is a lot of 3-4 defenses in the North. So it is a lot of stop the run because it's a very run first kind of place. But yeah, it's more of a general question than it is a specific one, I guess. But when it comes to the transition from college to the pros, we've all seen that it can be quite hard. Like, players at a college level are able to succeed through sheer athleticism alone. Like you said, sometimes it was like watching a man play against boys, and that is something that does happen in the college level. And then you see them move to the professionals, and everyone's that talented at the professional level. Everyone is that big at the professional level. Do you think that's something that is especially harder for defensive players than it is offensive? Because we covered the offense last week, and I guess it extends to Mark as well, because he's quite college knowledgeable, like more so than I am anyway. Like, do you think that's a thing do you think that's a real thing that we see a lot? Like, is you come to the pros and you're going to struggle for a year, maybe 2 years, and that's when defensive players tend to come together.
I think learning defense. I think it's harder to come into the NFL and make an instant impact on defense because the game's rigged against defense now. You know, the way that penalties are in the game and the way that quarterbacks are protected and flags down the field. So the game's rigged against defenses now. It's difficult to be a defender and to be able to play an actual game because you'll get flags sometimes as well. You'll get away with more stuff in college than you will in the NFL. Not just that as well, the game's so much faster in the NFL. Like, I've always thought that it must be almost nearly impossible as a linebacker in college to be able to translate that to the NFL. You know, like, I think that's why we see players like Patrick Queen and the guy who came into the Chargers last year, Murray, you know, like, struggle. Whilst they hold up in the run game, they'll really struggle in the pass game. You know, I mean, John's a 49ers fan, and Fred Warner wasn't what Fred Warner was in his first year. You know what I mean? It's so difficult being a linebacker in the modern game. You know, like, because you're 1 minute you're going to be lining up against, you know, like, you could be the man who's lining up against Kelsey. You know what I mean? And then the next one, you're the guy who's taking Alvin Kamara out the backfield. And the way that offense is hide and disguise looks so much now, it's not always telegraphed whether it's a run or whether it's a pass play. So whilst I think the transition from an offensive player to the NFL is easier, we saw that with CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. We've seen running backs like Josh Jacobs coming in and have 1,000-yard season straight away. I do think it's more difficult on the defensive side of the ball to make an instant impact.
Yeah, I think
you didn't. Sorry, Jordan. Go on.
I was about to jump in and say, like, just real quickly, it's like Mike's saying, coming from college, you know, I won't go too much into this because I feel like we want to do an episode on this in the future, you know, about techniques. And he does play a 6'7", but he mainly plays a 9, and he didn't really do that in college. You know, moving, it might look like not far on a defensive line where you're moving, but there's so much more to do once you move to, like, somewhere from, like, say a 6'7" technique to a 9. He's like coming from a stand up to a hand in the dirt. You know, there's so much more different things you've got to learn if you haven't done these stuff in college when you come into the NFL. So it's like touching on what Mark said. You know, it's just these extra little things. You know, it's not just like, oh, you learn this and that's just easy to do. It's so much process in your head. You've got to remember to put it all into one thing when it comes to a football game, and that's where sometimes it takes a few years to do that, so to say.
Yeah, and one of the other things as well is that you can be kind of a one-move pass rusher in college. You can have the spin or the club or whatever, and you can beat your man. And to be honest, with the standard of some college teams' offensive lines, it isn't. I'm not saying it's not that hard, but it's easier than it is in the pros to do that. Once you come to the pros, even the worst NFL offensive tackles can defend against a guy that does one move for the entire game. You know, this is a thing that a lot of young defensive players, I think, struggle with, is having to refine the game and trying to find. You can't be a pure speed rusher. You have to kind of have that mix of both. I think Rashawn Gary's got it, though. He's a really good athlete, but he's also really strong. So I think I'm pretty much on board with Jordan there. I think we're going to see him take a big leap. And it's like Mark says as well, the game slows down for you as you get further into your career. So I'd be optimistic about him taking a step forward this year. Definitely, I think it's a good choice. Mark, I think you've got some thoughts on him as well. So let's go over to you. What have you got on Rashawn Gary?
Well, first of all, I was disappointed with Rashawn Gary in college. I think I expected more out of him when he went to Michigan. In 2016, he was the #1 recruit in the country coming out of high school, coming out of New Jersey. He decided to go play for Michigan, and I don't think that was the best move for him. At Michigan, he didn't really have an awful lot of production. You know, like, if you look at his statistics in Michigan, he had a junior year where he got he had a freshman year. He started as a freshman, and he had half a sack. In his sophomore year, he had his best statistics, where he had 5.5 sacks, and then he had a really poor junior year and decided to declare for the draft. He had 3.5 sacks on his junior year and came into the draft early. He shone out in the combine, looked like an athletic freak, but didn't have the production to back it up for Michigan. Had the tools, you could see flashes, never really had a production. He was drafted number 12 by the Green Bay Packers, which I thought was probably about 12 picks too high. I had him slotted in at the back of the round one. A lot of those issues, what he had coming out, remained for the first 2 years of his pro football career. An inability to finish, an inability to hit the quarterback, an inability to disrupt plays, an inability to constantly make pressure on the backfield. He turned it on in the playoffs of 2020. He had a good playoff run for Green Bay in 2020, and he had a decent end to the season. The truth of the matter is Green Bay need this guy to be good. They need him to be the sum of what his parts are. Because they've got Xavier Smith and they've got Preston Smith. Both of them are in the tail end of their careers. Now, Xavier Smith's probably a better player still at this point than Preston Smith. And they're going to want to see Gary come in and make opposite Xavier Smith his home. Now, I know he plays in a 3-4 in Green Bay. I thought when he came out of college, he might have been a 5-tech. He's a big lad. It's like 275 pounds, about 6'5" as well. Maybe taller. I might be robbing a few. I might be robbing a few inches off him. He has to be more consistent. He has to be more consistent. I'm still not a big fan of him, if truth be told. I was worried that he would have ended up at the Raiders that year. Kind of felt like we dodged a bullet. He's a different beast to Cleefeld. He's far more athletic than Cleefeld. Yeah, I think we need to see him what we saw in the playoffs, and we need to see that more consistently. He's definitely got the makeup of an NFL pass rusher, whether that's handing the dirt or standing up. He's definitely got the athletic profile for it. He just needs to bring his production up to match that.
Yeah, speaking of like him in college, don't you think that his physique's changed? Obviously, he's still a big lad, but it feels like he's got more muscle on him than he has like extra poundage, should I say? You know, like, and I just feel like as well as that, all this stuff coming into NFL, it just seems like he's. I know what you're saying. Like there is, it's like there's a lot more meat on the bone there. There's a lot more that we should be expecting from him, and maybe next year, where if it's all just coming together, it will benefit him, all these things. But I know what you're saying. It is also on the other side of it. I'm expecting a breakout year. The Green Bay do need it. You know, I totally agree with you. Green Bay do need it to come from him.
Do you know, I think the switch to Joe Barry might suit him. Joe Barry comes across from the LA Rams. He was under Sean McVay. I know that they'll play a 3-4, but I expect that to have some wrinkles. I expect us to see Rachelle Gary with his hand in the dirt, playing in a 4-3 front more often than in the 3-4 front, which I think will help him. Joe Barry's also a linebacker coach specialist. So if he does want him to play more in space, standing up as a stand-up pass rusher, that can only benefit him. That Joe Barry was a linebackers coach at the LA Rams. So that move might actually help Rachelle Gary. I think we might see a few more 4-3 fronts like we did in LA, like in LA. But I also think that when they are playing 3-4, we'll see him a bit better in space.
I think those are all fair comments. I think, like I said in my sort of response to Jordan, he was extremely raw coming out of college. He shouldn't have been, given all the playing time he had. But I think there was a sense that he needed a fair bit of refinement. And yeah, I think there's definitely enough there to like. And as you say, the Packers do really need something from him. The amount of defensive players they've drafted since the sort of like the era where they were getting guys like Clay Matthews, the amount of like defensive players they've drafted that haven't really panned out to be the force that they thought they would. I think he's got to come good, really. Otherwise, that'll be another reason for Aaron Rodgers to get pissed off. You know, this is the thing. It's like, it's all right not picking weapons to help it, but what they are picking isn't working. So that's where the issues start. So I think that pretty much sums up Rashawn Gary. Let's go to the man down from Jordan. Let's go to Mark next. I know he wants to talk about Derrick Brown. He absolutely fucking loves Derrick Brown. So and he loves the team he plays for as well. Probably more than his own franchise at this point. So I'll turn it over to you, Mark. What you got, Derrick Brown?
Yeah, Derrick Brown was just another in the long list of Carolina Panthers draft picks, which I absolutely loved. And I was a huge fan of him coming out of Auburn. I'm an Auburn fan. And Derrick Brown was one of our top recruits that year. Played defensive tackle. He's got really good defensive tackle size. It's about 318, 320 pounds, about 6'5", good big arse, really good anchor. Was actually better in the run game in college, but still really disruptive as a pass rusher. Could get into the backfield, or he wasn't going to be a sack merchant. And that's really what we saw in the NFL. When we look at his box scores, nothing too massive. You know, like he had 15 starts out with 16 games. So, you know, consistent, no injury. Played in the 16th game. It was just his rookie game. You know, like, so there was no injury there. He had a clean bill of health for 16 games. That's a plus for a rookie in today's game because they don't play that many games in college. You know, so he was still able to get a full calendar of games in. He had 21 solo tackles. Nothing special there. Pretty standard, pretty substandard, actually. And he had 2 sacks. In total, his combined tackles were about 34 tackles. So when you look at that as a test pick, you're like, well, what are you on about, Mark? Why do you love this guy so much? He doesn't look so good to me. So when you look at the stats that I think count, the stats that don't go into the box score. Okay, he had 8 tackles for loss. He had 4 passes defensed. He had 12 QB hits. He had 19 QB pressures. So the difference between a QB pressure and a QB hit. QB pressure is when you're putting enough pressure on the quarterback to move him off his step or to hurry him into a throw. That's when picks happen. That's when takeaways happen. A hit is when you make contact with the QB, either as or just after he's thrown the ball. Doesn't come up as a sack, but it's pretty much as good as a sack. The thing I like is I like the 4 passes defensed. There's signs of J.J. Watt in there. You know, that tells me that you're a penetrator in the backfield. That tells me that you're getting uphill, you're getting upfield quick. You know, you're not only just generating QB hits and QB pressures, you've got the awareness to bring yourself big at the right point and to make it harder for the quarterback to slot that ball through you, and you'll defend the ball at the point of attack. A lot of what you'll do will not be shown in the box art. A good season for Derrick Brown will probably be about 5 sacks. The Raiders have just signed Gerald McCoy. You won't even have Gerald McCoy type box stat production. What he is he's a big body who can command double teams, who can penetrate and play 1 tech and 3 tech, and be able to get up the field, stuff the run game, whilst also collapsing the pocket and putting pressure on the opposing quarterback, hence his hits and stuff like that. There's reasons why I think he's going to have a breakout year. His run grade for PFF was actually pretty poor, and that was the better side of his game. His run grade was only 54, 52, you know, run grade. His pass rushing grade was 72.5. Now, a lot of that was where he was played. They had Kwame Short in there alongside him. He was put into a position where he was going to be the upfield penetrator. Short's now out of town. Derrick Brown's the main man in the middle. I expect we'll see him a lot more at 1 tech and at 3 tech on pass rushing downs. That will suit Derrick Brown more. 2 other things as well. Brian Burns, who's just an absolutely fantastic player, who I think's already broken out, but I think will be a Pro Bowl player this year, and we'll see double-digit sacks from him this year. Having him on one side and Hassan Reddick, who they signed in free agency, means that there's less double teams. Not that Derrick Brown struggles against double teams, but there's less double teams that he'll face in the middle. You know, when you've got these 2 guys on the edge who can rush, Hassan Reddick got 12.5 sacks last year. Burns got 9. He got 8 the year before. He's going to make the jump to double-digit sacks this year. He's tremendous. You know what I mean? We're going to see Derrick Brown, you know, feeling his way through now, and I think we're going to see a lot more production. I always feel that defensive tackle and defensive lineman takes a while to adjust to the NFL as well. We talk about particular position groups which are hard to adapt to, and I think because of the stunts and the twists and the levels of better blocking that we see in the NFL, you know, like it's not very often in college game you come up against really good tackles or really good guards. Normally, the best guard is normally stuck out at tackle in the college game, and what we see tackles kick inside the guard once they come to college. So, you know, like he's up against a lot better standard of player, and he's had a chance to feel them out now. I just think he's an excellent player. I'm not going to say he's going to go Pro Bowl this year, although it wouldn't surprise us. I just expect to see this jump from promising, maybe just above promising rookie season into this guy's going to be something special. I do think he'll have many, many Pro Bowls in his career. I don't think he's ever going to be like Aaron Donald. Get your idea that Aaron Donald is the normal defensive tackle now out of your mind. But I do think he is going to be a very, very good defensive tackle in the NFL for many years.
I think that's a really good summary. I know you were a big fan of his in that draft. I think he was one of those guys, again, a bit like Rachelle Gary, who I was sitting there kind of thinking if he fell far enough, because I think we were at 14, we took Kinlaw. I didn't think he would fall to 14, but he's one of those guys that you have an eye on just in case. I thought he was a really good player coming out of college. Gone to a really good team. I think a developing team as well. I feel like his stature, his fortunes are a bit tied to how good that team is, because if teams are having to play from behind against the Panthers, it gives him more chance to show up, in the pass game. Obviously, the run game is a huge part of being a good defensive tackle, but it doesn't get you on the highlight reel. Sacks do. So I think it'd be interesting to see how he develops as that team develops. But I do think he's a really good player. Jordan, I think you were a pretty big fan of his coming out of college as well. What are you thinking on Derrick Brown?
I think just a couple of things that Mark said, which were just spot on. Just to go a bit further, like you said, double teams. I think you're one of the most double teamed defensive tackles in the NFL last year in his rookie year, and Mark's right to point out like these stats, that people want to put on paper. Sometimes, like if you look deep further into it, like if someone's getting double teamed constantly, you give him opportunities for people outside you, to get to him. If that is part of football, you might not have the highlight reels, you might not have the key stats that people want to see, but you're making it a lot easier for people to get to the quarterback. And then if them guys that keep getting to the quarterback, they might have to double, especially like you said, Reddick's coming in. Then if they're getting to the quarterback, they might have to think about double teaming them, which gives Brown maybe only one person time to go through. You can't double team everyone on the offensive line, you know what I mean? So you're going to give opportunities to these guys to get to them. And I just I know it's going a little bit off topic. I love what Carolina are doing with that defense. I absolutely love it. I can't wait to watch that next year. Go to work but yeah, I think even if the stats are not shown on paper how good Brown is, I think what he does, if you look deeper into it, is just going to benefit his team in making him one of the best defenses in the NFL next season.
That's a big call. How far off being one of the top defenses do you think they are? I think they were pretty good last year. I think I'm right in saying, despite the fact the rest of the team didn't really hold its own. Do you think they're pretty close to being that? Either of you, really. I know you're a big Panthers guy, Mark.
Their pass rush was good. Their defensive line was good. I thought their second level defense was better when Chin played in linebacker primarily. Their secondary was tatters. It was absolute tatters, which is why they got Horn, in the first round. And they've got Troy Pride Jr. there out in Notre Dame, who played probably more football than they expected to. Getting Horn means that they can probably rely on Pride Jr. and Horn. They can put Jackson in the slot. And that secondary looks now a lot better now they've got a true man cover corner. I mean, they're young. They're a young, promising team. This Carolina team, it's hard to not get excited about them because they have got a lot of good young talent. And they've got a really good head coach in Matt Rhule. And they've got a really good offensive coordinator. You know what I mean? And I just think, the arrows pointing so up. They've got an ambitious owner. They've got the richest owner in the NFL. I think I might be right in saying that. So they're gonna have the money to make a splash in free agency moving forward. And yeah, they're just an exciting team. And Derrick Brown's one of those cogs. Jordan's right. The stuff that this kid does really well will not show up on the box stats. He's man strong. He's proper run man strong. Good luck if you're going to try and single team him in the middle. You know, like he'll just power through you. He's going to demand double teams, which he did last year, which means that Hassan Reddick and Brian Burns are going to eat. And that doesn't show up in the box stats, but that's important. That's important in the NFL.
That's fair. I think those are all really good points. Sometimes, you know, the most impactful players aren't the ones you see getting the stats. I think he's got that about him where I think he could be that sort of player. Bones, when we talked to NFC South, I know Mark did the Panthers because they're his secret team. But I think you were pretty positive on the Panthers as well. So Derrick Brown, what you thinking on Derrick Brown?
I mean, there's literally nothing to disagree with about what Mark's just said about the Panthers for me. I think they've got a good-looking team. I think Chin was great to watch last year. I'm interested to see Horn play in this defense this year. I think this team's going places, and I think they're good places. And I think Brown's definitely part of that. My question though was because there was a brief mention of Bosa, and then the not all defensive tackles are going to be Donald. Who would be your if Derrick Brown ends up being who we think he could be? Who's your comp for him? Who's like you, either current or recent player comp? Maybe they can be retired a couple of years, I guess, if there's an easier one there. But yeah, who's the comp?
It's difficult because I don't think he's the NFL's moved a lot. So these days you can't just be a true nose, and he's not just a true nose. He definitely could. He definitely at college. I definitely thought he had a little bit of Casey Hampton about him. You know what I mean? I definitely thought he reminded us of Casey Hampton. You know, like Casey Hampton, you'll remember was the nose tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers back in their glory days. And Casey Hampton was shorter and stouter and a little bit heavier. But what he was as a nose is he was a nose and was able to get double teams, and he was able to push the pocket, which is what I felt Derrick Brown could do. I'm not saying he's Casey Hampton. He's not identical to him. But he's got some Casey Hampton traits when he plays at nose. But he's got the ability as well to play a 3-tech into rush up the field in a 3-tech position. You know what I mean? It's difficult. It's difficult to actually, you know, like comp players to players these days. But I think I would probably say if I was going to say, I was having to pick a name on who I feel he could be in the NFL. A guy who played for you, Bones, so Dominican Sue. You know, as I feel that's the kind of player he can be in his career. You know,
that's not a bad comp to have. Just won a Super Bowl, didn't he?
I think that's a really good comparison. If I was going to pick a current player, I actually thought he had a lot of similarities to DeForest Buckner as well. So perhaps not in size, but I thought his impact, the way he played, his explosiveness, and maybe not getting the stats he deserves. I think there's a lot of similarities there. I think I think Derrick Brown's a really good player. I'm quite looking forward to seeing him take the next step this year, see how he gets on. Okay, so I'm going to move from Derrick Brown, and I'm going to go next because I'm going to take another defensive tackle, number 3 pick in the 2019 draft, Quinnen Williams, who's at the New York Jets. Now, it's probably a little odd to pick a number 3 overall pick as a potential breakout player. It's kind of like Captain Obvious, I suppose. But he hasn't had the easiest start to his career. I mean, for a start, he got drafted by the Jets. That's never a good thing. But, and obviously they've been historically bad the last 2 years. I think he's just starting to show his potential. You start looking at what he was able to do last season. He hasn't been brilliant. He wasn't brilliant in his rookie year. Let's get that out of the way first and foremost. We've already talked about the fact that it's not particularly easy to be, a rookie defensive tackle, and it's certainly not easy to be it when you're on a bad team. I don't think he was even starting for some of that season. He only started 9 games, I think, in his rookie season, which is quite a low number, really, for a guy drafted so high. And obviously, when you look at some of the people drafted around him, it perhaps wasn't the impact they were looking for. But I thought he took a really big stride forward last year. He ended up with 7 sacks. PFF absolutely loved him, had him as a top 10 player. Apart from against the run, he was 17th against the run. So that's something that I think we'll need to see improve. But his pass rush was certainly getting up there. You look at his pass rush grade from the last season, and obviously with 7 sacks as well. I thought he was a bright spot on a very bad team. I seem to remember having a pretty good game mid-season, possibly against the Raiders. I think the game where they got quite close to stealing a win until Greg Williams called the cover nobody defense. I thought he was pretty good in that game. That was probably the most I'd seen him last year, but I've seen him pop up on a few, Jets highlights here and there, such as they were. But in terms of taking a step forward going into year 3, I think there's a couple of big things in his favour. Number one is the new head coach, obviously Robert Saleh, coming over from the 49ers. I know all about Robert Saleh. I've had some issues with him, as anybody who's been in the group chat will know. Hang on. Mark's telling me he was at the Giants. That's not the same guy. That's... I don't know who you're thinking of, but this is definitely a Jets guy. Trust me. The big thing for me, Saleh coming over from the 49ers. Obviously, I know all about him. Anybody who's been in the group chats will know that I wasn't always on his bandwagon, but he did produce a top quality defensive line 2 years in a row, and he's been an interesting guy, Saleh, really, in terms of what he's been able to get out of previously underachieving defensive linemen. So when you look at what he did when he came into the 49ers, we drafted a number of people quite high for the D-line. One in particular I could think of is Eric Armstead, who was the subject of like trade rumors and such like before Saleh came in. He then had his biggest season. Now he's on a long-term contract. We know what he's done with Nick Bosa. And also DeForest Buckner as well, although he's now a Colt. He became a much better player under Saleh. And I think that's what we're going to see from the Jets. If they're going to see one thing this year, I think it will be an improved defense. I don't know if the offense will go at the same speed because Zach Wilson obviously is a rookie. We don't know how good he is. We don't know how good he's going to be yet. But I think the defense will take a big step forward. And I think Quinnen Williams is going to be a big, big part of that. He's also now got Carl Lawson playing next to him, which is probably one of the more underrated defensive linemen in the league. And I think that combination could see a lot of blocking, being taken away from him. We talked about the double teams earlier. Obviously, if you're a dominant player, double teams is not a massive thing. But I think it can, obviously, it helps if you're not being double teamed. And I think he's perhaps suffering even last year from being one of the few talented players on that defense, certainly on the defensive line. One thing you can be sure of is that's going to improve, going into this season. They also got guys like Ronald Blair coming in, who, while they're not necessarily known names, are solid rushers and will give offenses something to account for. So I don't know. I see Quinnen Williams taking a big step forward. How big? I don't know. It's difficult to be a dominant defensive tackle. It's difficult to... A lot of the sacks now come from the edge players. The guys like Bosa and people like that, and even people like Gary to a certain extent, who we talked about earlier. But I think there's a real potential for that defense to go from whatever it was. I would imagine it was ranked pretty low last year. I don't have the stats to hand, but I don't think it was considered one of the better units. I think it will probably jump to the middle/top of the defenses this year. Whether the offense can follow it, what Saleh's like as a head coach, we don't know any answers to that yet. But I do think the defense will be massively improved, and I think he will be the biggest part of that. Him and Carl Lawson, I think, could have a really good year between them. So yeah, I've kind of been on this bandwagon. There was some talk back in 2019 that we were potentially going to take him instead of Bosa. I wouldn't have been happy if we'd done that, but I think he's going to become a really good NFL player, and I think it starts this year for him. Mark, I think you've got some comments now. We've figured out which Williams it is I'm talking about. So what have you got for me, Mark? Go on. Yeah,
I thought you were talking about Leonard Williams, and I'm like, he's not a fucking Jet. He's a Giant. I was like, Tom's going to be in the comments going mad. I was like, I was adamant you were talking about Leonard Williams when you started off talking about him, because Quinnen Williams for me has already had a bit of a breakout. So I was kind of like, so that's what threw us a little bit. Quinnen Williams is a very good player. We've got to remember, I think, when you're playing defensive tackle, is, as we said before, it's a strong man's game. It's a man's game in the trenches. And when Williams came out of Bama, he was 20 years old. He's one of the youngest players in the draft that year. He's now 23. And I think what we're seeing is a young man become a man. He's getting that man-like strength, what we were talking about with Derrick Brown. You know what I mean, though? They're the same age. You know what I mean, though? You know, Derrick Brown came out a bit later, but they're the same age, both 23 years of age. So he's got that man-like physique now, which an NFL strength program gives you. Yeah, you've got to remember as well, when he's out of Bama, he came out of nowhere that year. And arguably went into the draft on the back of having that amazing season for Bama, where he was just wrecking players in the backfield. You know what I mean? It was possible. People did say at the time, this could be a year early. Even though he was at some point slated to be the #1 pick, there was enough concern about him coming out. And there was a little bit of talk that people were saying, maybe he could have went back to college, maybe he could have got stronger, but they didn't blame him for leaving on that production. I think it's just hard as a 20-year-old to play in defensive tackle in the NFL. And I think part of it is because he's now 23 and he's just filled out. He's got the strength, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a tough league to come into if you're that young. And you're absolutely right. He was a very late sort of riser on people's draft boards. I think as a lot of the Bama team were, and generally are, because they start showing up in the big games towards the end of the season. Everybody thinks they've got their evaluation slightly wrong. So yeah, I think you're right, and you're right. He was in the discussion for the #1 pick. He was in discussion for any of the top three. He ended up going third, and probably, arguably, if he'd gone to either of the other teams, he might have had an easier start to life in the NFL. It's just one of them things. Unfortunately, you landed a bit of a situation. You kind of, you have to make the best of it. Like I say, he had an average rookie season. I think average is probably being kind, actually, looking at his stats. But like his second season, last season, I thought he was really, really good. And with a more, and as you say, it's partly he might have had a breakout already. It's difficult to quantify that sometimes, but I do think there's another level for him to get to. That sort of Aaron, he's had the Aaron Donald comparison, which seems mad to me because there's no similarity whatsoever in physique. I don't know where that one's come from. I think statistically, kind of, maybe in PFF and grades like that, he might bear out as that sort of player. He's certainly not that physique of player, though.
I think it's because he's a true 3-tech, this kid. He's not like we talked about Derrick Brown before, who can be a 1-tech, 3-tech. Quinnen Williams is a true 3-tech. And I think if you're a 3-tech in the NFL today, you're going to get compared to Aaron Donald. I think for the next 50 years, if you're a 3-tech coming into the NFL, you're going to be compared to Aaron Donald. Probably for me, already in his career, the greatest defensive player that the NFL's ever seen, and probably a player who's already changed the position of defensive tackle. I don't think we've ever seen a defensive tackle like Donald,
No, it's mad to think about as well, because he went quite low in that draft, and people say he could be undersized and all this kind of thing. And now everybody seems to look for that type of player every year. And as you say, that's the comparison now. That's the ceiling. I don't know if Quinnen Williams could get to that level, but if he gets close to it, it'll make the Jets a much better team. And if he's going to do it, he's in the perfect defense to do it. This is a defense that, to be honest, doesn't seem to care about stopping the run a lot of the time on the defensive line. They go after quarterbacks. That's what Saleh does. That's what Saleh gets his teams to do. So really excited to. I'm actually quite looking forward to seeing that Jets team full stop. I don't know how good they'll be, but they'll certainly be more entertaining than they've been in the last 2 years. I think there's some big players in that defense, definitely. What about you, Jordan? What did you reckon to Quinnen Williams coming out of the draft? Do you think he was a good player? Did you think he was worthy of where he got took? I know there was some debate over that at the time.
Yeah, I thought he was a good player. I don't think he blew me away and stuff, but I thought he was a good player. But look, I agree. Like the last year and stuff, he really stepped up his game. He were brilliant. I can't remember what you said. Mentioned, I think it was like 7 or 8 sacks he got from inside. It was such a bully in that run game. But just to play, because we always don't like to. It's nice not to agree with certain people. I'm not disagreeing with you, John. I'm just playing devil's advocate a bit and thinking. I'm looking at Saleh. I don't doubt it. Like you'll know more than me, but I thought he was fantastic at the 49ers. Like I said, you watch more games than me, but he had a good defense to work with there. He's coming over to the Jets now. I know he's the head coach. He's not the defense coordinator, and he'll have some say into it. It might be a little bit of a fall off with Quinnen Williams, if it doesn't all go to plan. It's like I say, it's a if you put them two defenses up together, you know which one you're picking, don't you? The 49ers one. So like I say, I'm not saying that he's not going to have a breakout season, but you could look at it the other way and think, is there going to be some teething problems there where it just doesn't click straight away, and there could be a bit of a fall off before it gets better.
It's an interesting question because I think if somebody like Salah had loved Quinnen Williams, then perhaps we would have drafted him. I think though that the only thing I would say, people, and I'm one of the last people to give Salah credit, as anybody who's been in the group chats will know. I think he's a good defensive coordinator, but I do think there are flaws to him. But having said that, I think people forget the team that he took over were not good on defense, and even in his first season, they weren't great. What he was able to do was get more out of guys that should have been better players. I always go back to the Armstead example. I would have driven him out of San Francisco when Salah got there, and now he's probably one of our best defensive players. Buckner was showing signs of being that player, and obviously we traded him anyway. But I think he got more out of what was there. I'm not saying that what was there wasn't talented, but I think he got more out of it. I'm kind of banking on him doing the same here. I'm not saying it's a definite. I don't think it is, because as you say, anytime the coach changes and the scheme changes, you don't know how players are going to react. But I'm going to put some faith and some stock in that, and just hope he can push him to the next level, because I think if he does, I think he'll be a seriously top player. Bones, I know you've got some comments, so let's go. What have you got?
I actually don't think that Jordan's playing all that much devil's advocate on this one. I actually think there's a fair point in what Jordan said here for the Jets, especially moving over to Salah's defense, because they're coming from a 3-4, like Greg Williams' defense was a 3-4. It was traditionally quite blitz heavy, like that's what they played, and this is going to be a transition to a 4-3 defense. They signed someone in the off season, Carl Lawson, didn't they? They signed Carl Lawson to play defensive tackle in the line as well, and I'm just wondering if that's not going to be an easy transition, converting a whole defense from 3-4 to 4-3, especially one that lacked decent 4-3 outside linebackers. Like, they have 3-4 outside linebackers, but they don't have necessarily. I wonder if that overall maybe will hurt his potential. Like, I think he's got. I think you're right in the player potential is there. I just wonder if this is going to be the year where he peaks, or if it'll be the year after, once Salah's scheme beds in a bit more, if that makes sense, because it is going to be a transition.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, as I said just then, that obviously the first year under Salah with us, we weren't particularly good. We got a lot better after we got Richard Sherman and the guy who's now Joe Woods, who is, I think, the Browns defensive coordinator now. I'm not sure where he actually ended up. But we seemed to take a big step forward when he came in as DB's coach and we got Richard Sherman. So I do think there is some value in that. You need the rest of the defense to play with you. But I think the fact that he can get 7.5 sacks in that bad a team makes me not too worried about that. I think they're going to be better this year, and I think that's going to help his stats a lot. But we'll see. I don't know. We know nothing about the Jets. This is part of the problem. There are no certainties with the Jets. I don't think anyone's job, by maybe Zach Wilson's, obviously, because they just drafted him, is safe, in the sense that I don't think anything's going to be left unsaid to try and get him back to something approaching respectability, but I do think he'll show up quite strongly. I've seen a message in the chat saying that Mark wants to play devil's advocate. Well, I know he's pretty good at that. So go on, what you got, Mark?
Well, he's injured for one. I know that he had foot surgery about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I was reading that earlier.
He's expected to miss 8 weeks, which means that he will be fit for the start of the season or thereabouts. But he has had some injury concerns. He played 13 games in his rookie season. He played 13 games last year. And when you think he got 7 sacks, that's actually really good production for a defensive tackle out of 13 games, which would strengthen your argument, John. But ultimately, it's a rough game in them trenches. You know what I mean? What was a plus for me, Derrick Brown, who I think is the better defensive tackle out of the two of them, was that he played 16 games. Yeah. Quinnen Williams is already getting banged up, and he's already missed 6 games in 2 seasons. 3 in his rookie year, 3 last year. To go back though, when he came out as a sophomore. Very, very rare that players come out as sophomores these days. Didn't even see his junior season. He was a freshman, a sophomore, had amazing production in a sophomore season. I think he had something like, somebody go back and look at the stats, but I'm pretty sure he had 20 tackles for loss that year. Or it might have been 19 and a half tackles for loss. I remember it when I was scouting him. And he had something like 8 or 9 sacks for Bama. And he was unreal that final year. He shot up the draft board, you know what I mean, off the back of that production. 19 and a half, John. Thank you for looking. I remember it was nearly 20 tackles for loss. You know what I mean? He had unbelievable production that year. I think he came in with a lot of pressure, but he's a boy. I have to remember he was a boy when he came in. I don't think we can underestimate just how hard it is for a 20-year-old to play a defensive tackle in the NFL when you're playing fully grown men who are 10 years older on the other side. If I'm playing devil's advocate, his fitness is going to concern me. He's got a foot injury at the minute. You know, foot injuries can be tricky injuries, especially when you're playing in them trenches and you have to twist and move and you're off balance and you have to keep power, you know, as you're getting jawed off the first contact. You know, so it'll be interesting to see how he does come back. I think he will play some part of the season. Of course he is. It's not an Achilles or anything like that. It's a foot. It's a broken bone in his foot. But I do think that it might take him a little while to get going this year. I think we might see the better football from Quinnen Williams maybe post-Thanksgiving, maybe like back in November, December. Because I think that foot injuries are quite tricky.
Yeah, do you think some of the injury stuff is part of his body getting used to playing in the NFL, given that he was 20, you know, when he started his career? It feels a bit like that to me.
It's got to be. I mean, you know, like I've said this already, but let's not underestimate just how hard it is for a 20-year-old to come in and match up against grown men. You know what I mean? No, you're going to get put on your arse. You're going to get moved off the ball. You're not going to have the joy like you had at Bama that year. You know, you were in the backfield 19 and a half times. Can't expect that from a 20-year-old. That's why it's so unusual to see sophomore defensive linemen come into this NFL. You know what I mean? It's a man's game. And you're going to learn it at defensive tackle. You need to have some sand in your booty. He's not got the size of like Derrick Brown, who I feel more confident about. About 300 pounds, Quinnen Williams.
Yeah.
Now, Derrick Brown's got 20 pounds on him. I think he might have done better staying in Bama for another year. But look, he came and he went third. I'm sure his agent was happy. I'm sure he was happy with the check that he got. He still had braces on. I remember on the draft party, he had braces in. I was like, that's how much of a kid this is. He's still got braces in his mouth. You know what I mean? They were probably diamond ones, though. But yeah, I like him. I just think we'll have to see 16 games from him, which is a big ask this year after the injury. But look, we're talking about two of the two bright lights of defensive tackles in the NFL at the minute. You know, if we're talking about the best two young defensive tackles in the NFL, we're talking about them in Derrick Brown and Quinnen Williams. I'd be taking Derrick Brown if it was me. If I was building a franchise and I was allowed to take one of them, I'm taking Brown. You know what I mean? He might not get the sack production, but he's got more of what I want for an NFL DT.
I think there's a fair argument in there. I think you're right as well. There's always that concern over like what they call the one-season wonder when somebody comes out early because they've had a big year. I think there was an element to that around him at draft time. I was quite surprised he went as high as he did. But as you say, I'm sure his agent and himself were pretty happy with that one. We'll see how he goes. He's got a long career ahead of him, starting so young as well. I think, you know, there's a long time for his career to go yet, as long as he stays at the level he was at last year at the very least. But I think he's, assuming he can get healthy, I think he'll take a big stride forward. Perhaps taking a big stride with his injury isn't such a good idea, but there you go. Right, well, we're finally going to move off the defensive line because we're going to come to Bones next, and he wants to talk about Isaiah Simmons at the Arizona Cardinals. So this is a divisional rival for me. So let's hear what you've got, Bones.
I'm looking forward to talking about this guy. I've looked out here. I'm not going to have to compare my choice to any of your choices because I went for someone in the secondary rather than everybody else who went defensive line and now has to argue between themselves whose defensive lineman is the best. Yeah, but no, I wanted to talk about Isaiah Simmons. I know he's one of those players that people looked at and went, he didn't actually have the season that was maybe expected of him. He was talked about quite highly in last year's draft. I know there was talk of my personal team, the team I enjoy to watch, taking him at 3. I was on that bandwagon as well. I wanted us to take Isaiah Simmons at 3 over Jeff Okudah, but this is how it ended up, and we're with Okudah, and it's fine, But I wanted to talk about him. And the first point I wanted to bring up about this was, and it's something that is across the board, I think, last year, is all defensive rookies struggled last year because there was no preseason, there was no OTAs. And I think for defensive players, secondary defensive linemen, it doesn't matter where on the defensive side of the ball you are playing, not having OTAs and not having preseason games is hard. To come in as a rookie and play, what was it? His first game was against you, was it not, John? In week 1, or in the first actual game he played?
It was. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So his first snap of professional football was against the 49ers, and in week 1 of the regular season, not in week 1 of the preseason. That's hard. That is not an easy for any player, no matter how good you are touted to be coming out of college. Your first snap being an actual regular season game is so much pressure to face. I feel for every defensive rookie this year, and I think there's something. I think you can make a case for any defensive rookie this year, from last year, basically having a better year this year than they had last year, because it was a rough year to come into the league. But back to my actual play, I think the reason I brought it up is I think it really did affect Isaiah Simmons. I think he really struggled through not having that. I think you can see it in what areas he suffered in when he came to the professional level. So at college, he was a really good hybrid defensive player, which is becoming a more popular pick amongst teams in recent years. Hybrid defensive players who can play all over the field and do whatever you want them to do. They're getting popular, and he at college was really good at that. He could pretty much. I think he's played more strong safety than linebacker at college. It was more safety, but he just played all over the field basically, and can play all over the field. He's got that speed to cover. He runs less than a 4.4 at 6'3" and a bit, 240 pounds. He's a fast, big guy. He's got the speed, he's got the power. He's a good player. At college, you saw he had great play awareness. So you'd see him just come in like a bolt and make a tackle where it needed to be made, from the safety position, or he'd read the right pass play and he would make the pick. But there was something that I wanted to bring up that Mark mentioned earlier. That is, I think it was Mark mentioned it, but it was something again about how at college level you can play coverage. It was the linebackers point. That was the one about how for a linebacker, and I guess to safety to an extent, especially when you play box safety, is bringing the tackling side of your game over is a lot easier than bringing your pass coverage side of the game over from the college level. And I think that's another area where we saw Simmons suffer. Was he was still a great tackler, for the snaps he played. And this is something else. You look at his stats, and it's stats aren't that great, but he only played about 300 defensive snaps last year. He played under 30% of the Cardinals' defensive snaps, and in those under 300 snaps, there was there were the hiccups at the start of the season, and I do think it's rookie hiccups. I think it's rookie mistakes that would have been ironed out with the OTAs in preseason, and over the course of the season, we did see him improve in those areas. We saw his coverage game improve. He was still making good tackles. We saw his play awareness get better. He wasn't getting beat as easily, because I think the first big play we saw of him was the 76-yard touchdown that he got burned on by Mostert, or however you pronounce it, I apologize, from the 49ers. And but like I say, I do think that he is going to be a good player. He was arguably one of the best just general athletes in last year's draft, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And I think he's got that. He's got the mind for it. You could see it at college level. He had the play awareness. He had the wherewithal to recognize plays when they were happening. And I think once he's brought that over to the professional level, once his mind, because it is hard. It's hard to read a professional offense compared to a college level offense. You playing against a lot higher caliber of player, where there are some man defenses, like defense plays where he's just better than the guy opposite him, and it's clear to everyone to see. But the professional level, that doesn't happen as often. You're not just flat out better than the guy opposite you. But yeah, that's mostly what I wanted to say. I do think he's going to have a much better year this year. I think he's definitely in for a breakout play. I do think one of the biggest problems, though, the last point to touch on is I think he's more of a safety playing linebacker right now. I think he's slightly out of position. I think he should still be playing that strong safety role and can play all over the field. And at some point, if he does get back to that safety role, and you saw it towards the end of last season with the Cardinals, they started playing him in like 4 different. Well, he's a Swiss Army knife player, and if you can get him back to that, he can play all over the field. He can basically do whatever he wants when he's out there. I think he's going to shine. I think he's got that ability.
That's a good summary. Obviously, I've seen Simmons play a couple of times. I find him a really interesting and intriguing player, but there's a couple of points I'm just going to make quickly, and then I'll go over to everybody else. I really like him as a player, but I don't know what his position is, and I think you kind of hit on it there in the sense that he's still kind of a safety, really. Especially, I know there's a tendency now to play this positionless football. You're seeing it on both sides of the ball. I think a large part of that is the division that he's in. Obviously, you look at some of the teams that he's up against. Seahawks. You got Wilson with his athletic ability. The Rams can move the ball with anybody. We've got people like Kittle who are threatening in the middle of the field. You can see that Arizona are kind of drafting along those lines. Got guys like Buda Baker, Xavier Collins, and him now. 3 similar players for me. Baker's probably more of a pure safety, but I do think there's similarities between all 3 in the sense that I don't really, if you put a gun to my head, I couldn't naturally nail down to what those 3 positions are going to be on that defense. I don't know where they're going to line up in every play. That could be a good thing. Obviously, that's an unpredictability thing. My issue for somebody like Simmons is I think he suffered last year from them not really giving him a defined role. He was kind of moved around a lot, and I don't think they really knew what they wanted to do with him. What I did notice, and I think you touched on it as well, is that towards the back end of the year, he started to look a lot more comfortable, and I think that was largely because they said, okay, we know a bit of what we've got here. Let's keep moving him around, but let's make sure he basically has one responsibility in the game, or at least, something to focus on. So I thought he became a really good player towards the end of the season. My issue at the moment is there's a lot of players like him on that team. Is he going to get overshadowed? That's my only real thing. I'd be interested to see what he does. He would have been excellent in your defense, by the way, even under Patricia. I think he would have been fantastic. He's exactly the type of player that, if you're coming from that Patriots background, he's exactly the type of player you'd want on that defense. Jordan, I think you had a point on Isaiah Simmons, so I'll go to you. What have you got for us?
I think you beat me to the punch, mainly to be honest with you, John. But yeah, I think you're seeing these linebackers now coming out of college where they like them to be this player where they can put them where they want to, a bit like JOK that came out this year as well. They like to play them where they see best on the defense. At that point. But I like him as a linebacker. But I like him in coverage. He really just clicked at the back end of last year. And I think obviously playing safety, and I think he played a bit of cornerback on the inside. I think when players play like this, they become aware of the passing game, like against it really well. And then when you put him back in a linebacker, you see the awareness. And I remember it brilliantly because he picked off Russell Wilson at the back end of last year, and it was just the awareness of it seems to reads the ball well from these extra positions, and I do like him as a linebacker. I think he'll stay there. I think I'm drafting in Xavier Collins this year. I think it's just that linebacking core. It's so much difference there and so many different tells. You're not going to as an offense. Sometimes you're probably not going to know what you're going to get from them, or if they're going to come up or pull down with all these different type of linebackers. But I kind of think that Vance Joseph kind of knows what he wants to do with him. But it's always a bonus to be able to throw him into different scenarios as well. On top of that, if a guy can do more things, quite well, it's just going to benefit your team.
Yeah, I think you both made some good points there. I do think that you mentioned he played a couple of roles. I think it was he played slot. I think it was slot corner that he was playing, and he was playing like. I think he played a bit of edge rush as well, actually, towards the end of the season. But I do think I know John was saying that he doesn't really have a position, but I think, again, I do think that's kind of what they drafted him to be, was a sort of Swiss Army knife, positionless, like, secondary player. So I don't think he ever will have a truly defined position. I think that's where he is going to shine. I don't think he should have a truly defined position on the field. I think if you were to, like I asked Mark earlier, if you were to demand a comp from me, I'd say maybe like a Jabril Peppers out of New York, like, kind of, that's closest thing I could see. But I don't know. I like the guy. I really like the guy, and I'm just looking forward to seeing him play. He looks like a phenom. He runs under a 4.4, and he's huge. Like, I don't know.
I'm sure
it would be impossible to play against your football team.
I was going to jump in quick, sorry, John, and say that I think one thing that we might all agree on, I don't know if it's on the right coaching team. I think it would have been better somewhere else, where they could, after the last few weeks we mentioned and stuff. So
should have been a Lion.
It wouldn't be a podcast episode if we didn't shit on Cliff Kingsbury at least once, I guess. No, it's funny, isn't it, Bones? Most of your players that you've spoken the highest of, Taysom Hill springs to mind as well. These guys that can just play almost any position on the field.
I'm a fanboy for positionless football. I'm on this bandwagon full. I'm for it, all for it. It's like I've said to you a few times. I like RPO football as well. I like football that can go anywhere. And it can just be like, it looks like it could be a run, but then it's a pass. I just like that kind of football. That's my jam.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think it's the way the game's going as well. Mark, what have you got on him? Because I feel like he's the sort of player you would actually like quite a bit, but I've never actually heard your opinion on him as a player, so I'm intrigued to hear this one.
I was intrigued to see where he would play when he came into the NFL, because he was so good in coverage. And to be honest with you, his statistics were really good in coverage in the back end last year. I think he was like the 8th or 9th best linebacker in coverage last year, which means that he could, it's what was. I think the player that they envisaged him being is, I think he's going to play inside linebacker this year. The signed Xavier Collins, who is a very good pass rushing linebacker. If anyone's going to be blitzing, it's going to be him. But Baker will drop into the box, as we know, but he is a safety. They've got Chandler Jones on the other side. So I think we're going to see this less moving him around. And I think they're going to put him in an inside linebacker. He's come back 10 pounds heavier this year, which would probably give you a sign that they're wanting to play him an inside linebacker, more on the inside. I think what they want him to be is Devin Bush Jr. at the Steelers. I think that's the kind of player they want to see him be. They want to see him use his speed to be a sideline linebacker. They want to keep him clean. They don't want him taking on blocks. They don't want him filling in holes. They want to keep him clean so he can run, chase, and hit. And I think that's where we're going to see him make his name this year, at inside linebacker. I don't think we'll see him move around as much as we did. Because if they were going to do that, why go get Xavier Collins, who's another chess piece, another one. And he's a better pass rusher as well than Simmons, in all honesty. Yeah, I like him. I was a bit disappointed when he first came in, but I think, like you said, I think that was more so because they didn't know what position they were going to play him. I think he was a lot better at the back end of the season when they went, right, that's okay, you're going to be a linebacker. And there was less putting him in slot, there was less putting him at safety. Ultimately, I think if he's going to have a good season, I think he's going to have to stay at linebacker for the season. But the drafting that they've done will probably mean that. What is it about Arizona Cardinals, though, drafting these really athletic, linebackers? Hassan Reddick, who we talked about for the Carolina Panthers, was another, but I suppose he was the early one who came in, or Dion Buchanan. Do you remember Dion Buchanan?
Yeah, Buchanan. Go back even further. They drafted Tyrann Mathieu, who didn't really have a position coming out as well.
Yeah,
he was kind of one of those guys that people said, he can play anywhere.
Dion Buchanan was a strong safety, and they played him inside linebacker. And that's where, and he was really good. He had a very good career there under Todd Bowles. It hasn't went so well for him since he's went elsewhere. But at the Cards, he had a very good career, Dion Buchanan. I think he was a Pro Bowl mentioned at one point. He might have been a Pro Bowl alternative. I think that's what they want from Isaiah Simmons. They want that quick inside linebacker who you can keep clean and who can match up against a variety of offense that I see coming from McVay and Shanahan in the NFC West.
Yeah, it's very much an arms race in that division, isn't it? It feels like offenses develop, right? Okay, we'll draft players to take it away. I mean, you're seeing it a lot now with even the other teams just started to copy that sort of way of doing things now. He's an interesting player. I think if he does go to inside linebacker, it makes a lot of sense. They haven't got anybody at inside linebacker really. Nobody outstanding, at least. If you could make him an outstanding inside linebacker, I think that's a no-brainer for them, and it means they get something out of a first-round pick after a few defensive players have got a bit of rye on them. It would be nice to get one right, I think.
He's came into camp 10 pounds heavier. Why would you ask someone to put on 10 pounds if you didn't have the plan to play them more on the inside of the linebacker position? Because you'd want them about 230 pounds playing on the playing in safety in those other positions. The fact he's come in at 242 tells me that they're seeing a switch to inside linebacker for this lad.
Yeah, and you can see the logic why as well. You talk about the teams to come up against. They need an athlete there. It opens your options so much more if you've got a linebacker that can cover the field. You're not having to take him out of the game. If you can get a 3-down linebacker in this day and age, especially, that is a huge boost to your defense. So yeah, I'm seeing a decent season for him, but it will be dependent on the cards, and it will be dependent on his development in that position as well. But it'll certainly be interesting to watch. Some of the games last year, I think about like Buda Baker and him, and now they got Xavier Collins coming in as well. There were some real battles last season, so I can't wait to see what this season's like.
Make no bones about it. The addition of Xavier Collins will help them. Because in the return of Chandler Jones, because if anyone's going to be rushing from the linebacker spot, it's going to be Xavier Collins, and obviously you've got Chandler Jones, who's a perennial pass rush specialist. So he's not going to be asked to do any of that pass rush and stuff. What he's going to be doing is he's going to be sitting and waiting and spying and swooping and being sideline to sideline. The key is going to be keeping them clean, keeping blocks off them, which makes that defensive line, those three who are playing in front of them, that makes their job really important. Can they eat up double teams? Can they keep guards off the second level and off Isaiah Simmons?
Yeah, I think he's again, I think we've picked 4 good players tonight. It's just some are coming from further back than others, and I think after his rookie season, that it's going to have to be a big step forward from him, I think. But I do think he's got it in him, so I'm going to see him at close quarters, I think, at least twice a year. So it'd be interesting. And so is Jordan, obviously, being a Seahawks fan. So, yeah, I think he'll be a player to watch this year. Well, that's basically it. But one thing that we did last week, we ranked what we thought was most likely to go to the Pro Bowl out of the 4. Now, I'm struggling with this one. I don't think I can make a solid case for any of them without somebody arguing with me. So I'll let someone else go first. Who do we think is the most likely to Pro Bowl out of these 4? Go on, Mark. Let's see you bang the table for Derrick Brown.
I don't think Derrick Brown will have the box stats to be able to go to the Pro Bowl. You've got to remember it's the public who vote for the Pro Bowl, or at least have a say on it. And they're going to want to go for the guy who's got 8 or 9 sacks. If Quinnen Williams plays a full season, and if he gets 7 or 8 sacks again this year, I would probably say he's more likely to go to the Pro Bowl than Derrick Brown, even though I think Derrick Brown consistently affects the game more, just because the way the Pro Bowl's rigged. So I would not be putting Derrick Brown as the most likely to make the Pro Bowl. I don't think he's ever going to be more than a 5 or 6 sack season guy. I think he will have Pro Bowls in him, but I think it might be more like Calais Campbell, where he's getting the Pro Bowls and the recognition at the end, like when he's 27, 28, 29, as opposed to when he's 23, 24, 25.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a reasonable comment. What about you, Jordan? Who are you banging the table for out of these 4? Very quiet.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, to be honest with you, John. It's hard to make a case for. There's a difference between a breakout season and actually getting to the Pro Bowl, isn't there? But yeah, I'd probably side with Mark with Quinnen Williams, especially if he can get up to the same amount of sacks or past it. But just to say my guy Rashawn Gary, if it does all click for him and stuff, he can get into the backfield. We've seen how easy it is, and if he can pick up his sack count, he well could be there. You know how many fans Packers have. They'll be on the vote water constantly. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that perhaps hasn't been discussed, he's at the more visible of the four franchises that we've chosen. This is a team that is going to be in the national spotlight because of the whole Aaron Rodgers drama, but also is a fairly regular playoff team. So I think if he has an above average to good year, as you say, I think there'll be a lot of Packers fans out there rooting for him. What about you, Bonds? Are you going to speak up for your guy, or what are we going to do here?
I think you touched on an interesting point there. There is something to be said for the Pro Bowl and people actually watching the team, and if the player goes, because Quinnen Williams could have a great season, but nobody watches the Jets. Who's voting for him? It's the same problem that Stafford's had year after year. If he's been nominated, I don't know, but it's just nobody watches the Lions. I don't know. Yeah. It's hard, isn't it? I can make I feel like in a way I can make a case for Isaiah Simmons without really arguing with anybody because it's a completely different position. But no, I think there's definitely a fair shout in Quinnen Williams with the stats that you've already mentioned that he puts up and everything. It's about who's voting for you. It's just I do think Jordan also made a good point about Rashawn Gary. If Rashawn Gary has a good year, considering how many people watch Packers games, he's probably a good fit for a Pro Bowl vote. Cardinals could be in the camp where it's a bit harder for Simmons to get the vote because they're not as watched, and there's some really good inside linebackers out there. So we'll see.
Simmons is one of those guys, though, that I think if he shows up, we talked about the NFC West being, potential war ground of the division. If he shows up in those matchups, I think he's going to gain himself some national credibility really quickly.
He's good. He's a great player. We saw sparks of it last year. We saw sparks of him being a great player to watch. The pick on Russell Wilson is a great example. It won the Cardinals that game. Basically, it set them up for a game-winning field goal. He's got the sparks are there. He's playing a flashier position, for lack of a better way to explain it. Defensive line, unless you're getting sacks, isn't the flashiest position. If you're playing in the secondary and you can get picks and because you can still get sacks from the secondary, you're not limited to just I think it's a lot easier to get a pick in the secondary than it is the line. I'm not saying it's impossible, but yeah, you get more of a chance at exciting plays playing in the secondary.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. I think it's going to be. I think any of these four, in all seriousness, could make it. But we're turning it over to you guys, the audience. The poll's out on Twitter now. We had a poll on the offensive players last week, as I briefly mentioned at the start. TJ Hawkinson won, which actually surprised me because I think we talked down his chances on the pod, saying a bit like what he plays for a team that not a lot of people necessarily are going to be watching. But I do think he's probably the most talented of the four. So, yeah, fair comment for me. A couple of quick things before we sign off. Football is back tonight. It's the Hall of Fame game, I believe. I want to say it's the Steelers and the Cowboys, but I don't know, and I feel like I should know.
It is Steelers-Cowboys.
I've got that right. Yeah, so Steelers and the Cowboys. We're glad to see football back, aren't we? It's been a long time, hasn't
it? Yes.
So...
I didn't want to jump over anybody, but yes. I mean, even if it's only the Hall of Fame game and it's the preseason games and we're not seeing potentially anyone who's actually going to play in the regular season, it's still exciting, isn't it, just to have it back?
It's nice to have the game on because I think it's had its issues in the last few years. One with the pitch and obviously last year with COVID. Good to see fans back in as well, which I think is perhaps the underrated part of the NFL season. I know some teams had some fans in, but we're going to be seeing a lot more of that this year. A lot of teams planning for full capacity, which means the Seahawks will suddenly become invincible at home again. So there's that. Another quick thing that Gaz brought up, our man on the socials. Philip Rivers has been talking quite openly about potentially coming back to the NFL if the team is in need of a quarterback. Is there any appetite out there for that? Is there any team out there that would take Philip Rivers right now?
Fuck no. No. Just no. The truth of the matter is he got paid 25 million last year. So if he's coming back, you're going to have to pay him big. So there's talk about him going into the Colts. You know what I mean? Philip Rivers got paid 25 million last year by the Colts. He's going to want at least close to that. And also Carson Wentz. It just totally negates the Carson Wentz move. Fuck no. Don't go near Rivers Colts. Just start Jacob Eason. Don't trade for Nick Foles either. Just run the ball as much as you can and give the faith in Jacob Eason until Wentz comes back. Don't go for Foles. Don't go for Rivers. Don't take backward steps. Don't shackle yourself to bad deals. Just go with Jacob Eason.
Right, okay, so Mark's not in favour then. What about you, Jordan?
I think there's more people that believe that Andrew Luck is coming back. And that's just one person, I believe, that believes Andrew Luck is coming back.
Yeah, that well-known sports reporter.
Ultra weed hater.
Yeah, I couldn't remember what was the name as well.
I don't know, but that guy has multiple different usernames every other fucking week. I've seen that Ultra Weed Hater before. The guy's just pure parody bullshit.
Well, before we go, touching back on the Hall of Fame game, there's enough in this game to be excited about. One, Dwayne Haskins is playing. Remember Dwayne Haskins? Former first round quarterback taken by Washington. From Ohio, now at Pittsburgh. We're going to be seeing a bigger test pit of him. He was a first-round quarterback, boys. He's not far removed from being a first-round quarterback. It'd be interesting to see what happens to him in a better culture, I would say, in Pittsburgh. Because let's face it, before Ron Rivera arrived at Washington, it was a bin fire. You know what I mean? And he was immature to start off with. I wonder how he is under Mike Tomlin, who would probably chin any man who stepped out of line. You wouldn't fight Mike Tomlin, would you? You know what I mean? So that I'm interested to see in Dwayne Haskins, especially with Ben Roethlisberger at the tail end of his career, and this is his last season. So there's a legitimate battle there between Rudolph and Haskins on who's going to be the heir apparent to Ben Roethlisberger, if one of them two is going to be the heir apparent. So I'm looking forward to seeing him play today. I'm also looking forward to seeing the Dallas secondary, their depth. They've got fucking no one. So I'm interested to see what they're going to be piecing together at the back end of their, at their secondary. They've got no talent there. They've got a rookie in Joseph. They've got Diggs, who came in last year. I don't think Diggs will play many stats. We'll probably get a good look at Joseph. To say he was hot and cold at Kentucky is probably... It was whether he was switched on or whether you bothered, to be honest with you. So I'm interested to see those two elements. What's Dallas's depth like, especially in the secondary, and what's Dwayne Haskins going to look like?
Interesting. So there you go. If you thought I've no reason to watch a pre-season game, then there you go. There's a couple of good ones. We don't start pre-season for another week, but the Trey Lance hype train is well and truly in motion. So I'm quite looking forward to seeing how he does in real live action.
Do you know, maybe we could do that next week. Maybe we could do a training camp roundup. We could maybe have a little look at a few players in training camp who have done well. And we could maybe concentrate 5 minutes, on a little training camp roundup. Somebody who might make the roster, somebody who might make more of a splash than we anticipated. Maybe somebody who might fail to because of an injury. Golladay. Golladay. Oh, I had a cough there. I don't think you heard that there. I said Golladay. He's fucking pulled his hamstring already.
Who could have seen that coming?
Yeah.
Golladay injured. Kel Surprise.
I think we could do a full episode of what's happened at the Giants since training camp began.
Yeah, I do a better job keeping weight off than Kelvin Benjamin does. So Joe Judge has actually given me a tryout for next week. So
it just doesn't look good, does it? Kenny Golladay has suffered with injuries all his career. He's good when fit. Let's not make that mistake. Very good when fit, but it doesn't surprise us he's limped out of training camp already with a hamstring.
There's nothing running a few more laps won't solve. That's the best way to fix a hamstring injury. Just make him run a little bit more. So I think we should also do a feature on which NFL coaches would win in a fight as well, because I loved your description of Mike Tomlin. So
Mike Tomlin against Brian Flores in the final.
It depends. Are we talking just head coaches or entire coaching staff? Because if we're talking whole coaching staff, Detroit's got it like in the bag, 100%. You're all dead. Like,
I definitely won't fancy fighting your head coach.
Brian Flores and Mike Tomlin could take no shit. Like, they're going to take moving on. And Matt Patricia's massive. So, like, he's going to bring, like, the Big Show effect, trying to get him out of the top rope. You know what I mean? Like, he's just fucking huge, and that's just his beard. You know what I mean? So it's gonna. This pod's gone all over the place, yeah. Like, hasn't it?
I think we've lost control now.
Which coach would win in a knife fight? I'm taking Tomlin.
Vrabel.
Yeah. Vrabel's
not a bad shout, actually. Yeah, Vrabel's not a bad shout.
But my money's on MCDC every time. He's going to bite your kneecaps off.
Yeah.
I'd love to speak up for Shanahan, but honestly, I think he'd go out in the first round. He doesn't strike me as a fighter, to be honest.
Yeah, Gruden's all bark and no bite. He'll just mouth off a bit and get chucked out in about 2 seconds in, wouldn't he? Just let his mouth run off. He'd be the one who lets his mouth runs off and then spends half the fight hiding behind Brian Flores.
Well, there's a mental image to leave you on. We'll stop before we get ourselves cancelled anyway. But thanks for being here once again. I don't actually know what we're going to do next week, so we'll decide on a topic. But
we'll make it up as we go along.
We'll make it up like we just did, because that was some high quality content. So we'll be back. We'll be back next week. We don't know what day, because it changes every fucking week. But I think it's supposed to be Wednesday. So. Barring any circumstances, we'll see you then. Thanks for being here. Goodbye.
See you later, you bastards. Ciao.
Much love.